Marcus Chen had been a soldier for 12 years, but nothing in his military training had prepared him for this assignment. Standing in the pristine white corridors of the Galactic Diplomatic Station, he adjusted his tactical vest and checked his sidearm for the third time in 10 minutes. The briefing had been simple enough. Protect Princess Zarathul of the Celestial Empire during the peace negotiations with Earth. What they hadn't mentioned was that she was the most beautiful being he'd ever seen, with skin that seemed to shimmer like starlight and eyes that held the depth of nebulae. The assignment had come through Admiral Harrison's office with the highest priority classification. Earth's first contact with the Celestial Empire had been rocky at best. The aliens possessed technology that made human achievements look like children playing with sticks, but they needed something Earth had in abundance: creativity and adaptability. The peace talks were humanity's chance to avoid becoming another conquered species in their vast empire. Marcus had been chosen specifically because of his psychological profile. According to the analysts, he was immune to alien mental influences, had an unwavering sense of duty, and possessed what they called adaptive tactical thinking. In simpler terms, he was stubborn, loyal, and good at improvising when things went wrong. Given humanity's track record with first contact scenarios, things would definitely go wrong. The airlock hissed open, and Princess Zarathul stepped through accompanied by her retinue. She was tall, even by human standards, with an elegant bearing that spoke of centuries of noble breeding. Her clothing appeared to be made of liquid metal that shifted colors with her movements, and a circlet of what looked like crystallized light rested on her forehead. But it was her presence that truly struck Marcus. The air around her seemed to vibrate with barely contained energy, making his teeth ache and his vision blur slightly around the edges. "Your Highness," Ambassador Williams stepped forward with a practiced diplomatic bow. "Welcome to Station Harmony. This is Sergeant Marcus Chen, who will be serving as your personal security liaison during the negotiations." The princess turned her attention to Marcus, and he felt like he was being examined by something vast and ancient. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate in his bones. A human guardian. How quaint. "Tell me, Sergeant Chen, what makes your species believe you can protect one such as I?" Marcus met her gaze steadily, ignoring the way reality seemed to bend slightly around her. "Ma'am, my job isn't to believe anything. It's to make sure you stay safe while you're under Earth's protection. I've read your file, and I know your people have abilities we don't understand. But I also know that someone thought you needed a human guard, which means there's something we can do that your own people can't." A sound like silver bells rang from her direction, and Marcus realized she was laughing. "Fascinating. Your mind is surprisingly opaque. Most beings' thoughts are like open books to me, but yours?" She tilted her head, studying him with increased interest. "It is as though you are wrapped in shadows. No wonder they chose you." The diplomatic entourage moved through the station toward the princess's quarters, a luxurious suite that had been specially prepared for alien physiology. Marcus took note of every corridor, every intersection, every potential hiding spot or defensive position. His training kicked in automatically, but he couldn't shake the feeling that conventional tactics wouldn't matter much if someone really wanted to harm the princess. As they walked, he noticed something odd about her retinue. They all moved with perfect synchronization, their steps falling in identical patterns, their breathing matching exactly. It was as though they were all dancing to music only they could hear. When he mentioned it quietly to Ambassador Williams, the man's face paled slightly. "That's normal for her species, Sergeant. The Celestial Empire operates on principles we don't fully understand. Harmony, they call it. The ability to synchronize with the fundamental forces of the universe." The princess's quarters were a marvel of alien engineering integrated with human technology. Crystals grew from the walls in geometric patterns, pulsing with soft light that seemed to respond to her presence. The air itself felt different here, charged with potential energy that made Marcus's hair stand on end. He positioned himself by the main entrance while the diplomatic team began their preliminary discussions. That's when things started getting strange, even by alien standards. As the princess settled into what Marcus could only assume was a chair, though it looked more like a floating crystal formation, the walls began to sing. Not metaphorically, but actually producing harmonic tones that seemed to come from the very structure of the room. The other aliens in her retinue began to glow softly, their skin taking on the same starlight quality as their leader. Sergeant Chen, the princess called to him without turning around. Come here. There is something you must understand about your duties. Marcus approached cautiously, his hand instinctively checking his weapon's position. Up close, the energy radiating from her was almost overwhelming. It felt like standing next to a barely contained nuclear reactor. If nuclear reactors could think and had opinions about your life choices. You have been told that I am merely a princess, she said, her voice taking on additional harmonics that made the air shimmer. This is both true and entirely inadequate. In your terms, I am what you might call a conduit. The forces that govern reality itself flow through beings like me. We do not simply exist within the universe, Sergeant. We help maintain it. The implications of her words hit Marcus like a physical blow. If she was telling the truth, then he wasn't just guarding a foreign dignitary. He was protecting something that helped keep reality itself stable. The responsibility was staggering, but Marcus had faced impossible odds before. He'd held positions against overwhelming enemy forces, had made split-second decisions that saved lives, had stared death in the face and refused to blink. Ma'am, he said finally, that just means the job is more important than I thought. My orders remain the same, keep you safe. Everything else is above my pay grade. The princess turned to face him fully, and for a moment Marcus saw something in her expression that looked almost like respect. Perhaps there is more to humanity than we initially assessed. Very well, Sergeant Chen. Let us see if your species' legendary stubbornness extends to protecting those you do not understand. As the diplomatic discussions continued into the evening, Marcus maintained his vigil, unaware that his simple acceptance of an impossible task had just set in. The attack came at 0347 hours, during what should have been the safest part of the night cycle. Marcus had been studying the security feeds when every alarm in the sector began screaming simultaneously. The lights flickered, then died completely, plunging the station into emergency lighting that cast everything in hellish red shadows. Princess, Marcus called out, his weapon already in his hands as he moved toward her private chambers. The door was sealed, but he could hear something that made his blood run cold. The sound of the princess screaming, but not in pain. In rage. The harmonics in her voice were so intense that the bulkheads were beginning to vibrate. The security system was completely dead, which should have been impossible. The station's defenses had been designed by the best military engineers Earth had to offer, with backup systems for the backup systems. Nothing short of a coordinated assault by a technologically superior force should have been able to disable everything at once. Marcus overrode the door lock manually and stepped into chaos. The princess's chambers had been transformed into something from a nightmare. The geometric crystals that had been growing peacefully from the walls were now writhing like living things, their lights strobing in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The air itself seemed to be tearing, revealing glimpses of something vast and terrible beyond. 3 figures in dark armor were advancing on the princess, moving in that same perfect synchronization he'd noticed in her retinue. But this time it felt wrong, predatory. They carried weapons that didn't fire energy or bullets but seemed to cut holes in space itself. The princess stood in the center of the room, her arms raised, and Marcus could see why the attackers were moving so cautiously. She was floating 3 feet off the ground, surrounded by a sphere of raw energy that made the air around her burn with impossible colors. Her voice had taken on qualities that human ears weren't designed to process, speaking words in a language that seemed to bypass the brain and speak directly to the universe itself. The attackers' movements were becoming more erratic, as though reality was becoming unstable around them. Marcus didn't hesitate. Military training took over, and he did what soldiers do when faced with enemies threatening their mission. He adapted and attacked. He opened fire on the nearest figure, his bullets passing harmlessly through what should have been solid armor. The attacker turned toward him, and Marcus got his first clear look at their face through the helmet's visor. It wasn't a face. It was a void in the shape of a face, an absence that hurt to look at directly. When it spoke, its voice was like the sound of stars dying. Human, you interfere in matters beyond your comprehension. Withdraw and you may continue to exist. Yeah, that's not happening, Marcus replied, ejecting his useless magazine and switching to the experimental ammunition Admiral Harrison had given him. Lady, I don't care if you're the ghost of Christmas past. You're threatening my principal, and that makes you my problem. The experimental rounds were designed for use against alien technology, incorporating elements that supposedly existed in quantum superposition until they made contact with their target. Marcus had thought it was typical military technical nonsense, but when the bullet struck the void-faced attacker, the effect was immediate and dramatic. The figure screamed, a sound that made the princess's enraged harmonics seem gentle by comparison. Where the bullet struck, reality seemed to solidify, forcing the attacker back into normal space-time. It staggered, no longer moving with perfect coordination, and Marcus could see what looked like silver blood seeping from the wounds. The other two attackers turned toward him with movements that made his vision blur. They raised their reality-cutting weapons, and Marcus dove behind what had once been the princess's chair. The weapons discharged, and the air where he'd been standing simply ceased to exist for a moment, leaving a perfectly spherical hole in space that quickly collapsed in on itself. "Sergeant Chen," the princess's voice cut through the chaos with crystalline clarity. "They are void-touched. Your weapons can harm them, but you must not let them complete their ritual." Marcus looked around the cover and saw what she meant. The attackers were moving in a specific pattern, their footsteps leaving traces of absolute darkness on the floor that were connecting to form some kind of geometric design. Whatever they were trying to do, it was almost complete. He made a decision that went against every tactical instinct he possessed. Instead of seeking better cover, he charged directly at the nearest attacker. The element of surprise worked in his favor, and he managed to put 3 rounds center mass before the thing could react. This close, he could see that the dark armor wasn't armor at all, but some kind of living shadow that moved independently of the body wearing it. The wounded attacker lashed out with movements too fast for human eyes to track, but Marcus had spent years fighting opponents who were faster, stronger, and better equipped than he was. He'd learned that sometimes the best defense was to be too stubborn to die and too stupid to quit. He rolled under the strike and came up firing, emptying his magazine into the thing's center mass. The creature collapsed, its form beginning to dissolve back into shadow, but not before it managed to complete one final gesture. The geometric pattern on the floor blazed with dark light, and the air in the center of the room began to tear open like fabric. Through the tear, Marcus could see something that his mind refused to process completely. It was vast and hungry and utterly alien, existing in too many dimensions for human comprehension. Tentacles or appendages or concepts that might have been either began reaching through the opening toward the princess. That's when Marcus learned the most important lesson of his career. Sometimes the best way to protect someone isn't to put yourself between them and danger, but to trust them to handle the danger while you deal with everything else. The princess spoke a single word that contained so many harmonics, it might have been an entire song compressed into an instant. The reality tear stopped expanding and began to close, but the effort was clearly costing her. She was no longer floating, and the energy sphere around her was flickering like a candle in a hurricane. Marcus turned his attention to the remaining 2 attackers, who were now moving with desperate urgency to complete whatever their mission required. They split up, one advancing on the princess while the other began tracing new patterns on the floor with movements that left burning trails in the air. The experimental ammunition was running low, but Marcus had one advantage the attackers didn't expect. He was human, and humans had a talent for creative problem-solving under pressure. The station's emergency lighting systems ran on independent power supplies that were hardened against most forms of interference. If he could access the control panel and overload the system, he sprinted across the room, dodging weapons fire that removed chunks of reality from around him. The control panel was located behind a wall of growing crystal, but Marcus had noticed earlier that the crystals responded to the princess's emotional state. If they were connected to her somehow, then maybe they'd respond to direct stimulus as well. He placed his hand flat against the crystal wall and did something that would have gotten him court-martialed under normal circumstances. He opened fire at point-blank range into an unknown alien technology system. The crystals shrieked, a sound like breaking glass mixed with dying stars, and then exploded outward in a shower of fragments that cut through the nearest attacker like shrapnel through paper. The control panel was exposed, and Marcus quickly accessed the emergency lighting system. Military equipment was designed to be operated by soldiers under stress, which meant big, clearly labeled controls that could be manipulated even while wearing gloves and being shot at. He found the power regulation system and began systematically overloading every circuit he could find. The lights throughout the princess's chambers began strobing wildly, cycling through spectrums that human eyes couldn't normally see. The remaining attacker stopped its pattern tracing and turned toward Marcus with movements that suggested acute distress. Apparently, whatever the void touched were, they didn't respond well to rapidly changing electromagnetic fields. The princess took advantage of the distraction to speak another word that made the air itself ring like a bell. The reality tear snapped shut with a sound. In the aftermath of the attack, Princess Zarathul collapsed to her knees, the crystalline light in her circlet flickering like a dying star. Marcus kept his weapon ready as he approached, his eyes scanning the chamber for any remaining threats. The walls were scarred with reality burns where the void-touched weapons had missed their marks, and the geometric crystals hung broken and dark from the ceiling. "Your Highness? Are you injured?" Marcus knelt beside her, noting how her skin had lost its ethereal glow and now appeared almost human in its pallor. Up close he could see that she was trembling, though whether from exhaustion or fear he couldn't tell. "I am diminished," she whispered, her voice now containing only single harmonics instead of the complex symphony he'd grown accustomed to. "The effort required to close the void tear has temporarily severed some of my connections to the fundamental forces. I am for the moment almost as vulnerable as you." The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. The most powerful being he'd ever encountered was now depending on a human soldier for protection because she'd used her abilities to save them both. He activated his emergency beacon and began speaking rapidly into his comm unit. "Command, this is Guardian Actual. We have a code black situation in the diplomatic quarters. Hostile contact with unknown entities, 3 confirmed kills. Princess is secure but requires immediate medical attention." The response was immediate but confused. "Guardian Actual, we show no breach in station security. All systems are nominal. Please confirm your status." Marcus looked around the destroyed chamber, then at his communication device with growing suspicion. "Command, I'm looking at a room that's been shot to hell with weapons that cut holes in space-time. How exactly are you reading all systems nominal?" There was a long pause before Admiral Harrison's voice came through the comm. "Sergeant, we need you to escort the princess to secure medical immediately. Don't trust anyone except Dr. Elizabeth Reeves. Something very wrong is happening and we're not sure how deep it goes." As Marcus helped the princess to her feet, she looked at him with an expression he was beginning to recognize as her version of curiosity. "Your people's communication systems have been compromised, haven't they?" The void-touched rarely act without inside assistance. "Ma'am, right now I'm operating on the assumption that everyone except my direct chain of command has been compromised until proven otherwise. That's how you stay alive when you don't know who to trust." Marcus positioned himself between the princess and the door, his weapon ready. "Can you walk?" "Yes, though I fear I will be of little use if we encounter further resistance. The connection I severed to close the void tear was significant. It may take days for it to fully restore itself." She moved beside him, and Marcus noticed that her retinue members who had been in the outer chamber were nowhere to be seen. They moved through the station corridors with Marcus taking point, using routes he'd memorized during his initial security survey. Something was definitely wrong beyond the obvious attack. They encountered no security patrols, no medical teams responding to the emergency, no station personnel at all. The corridors were empty in a way that felt deliberate rather than coincidental. "Sergeant," the princess said softly as they approached a major intersection, "there is something you must understand about the void touched. They are not merely enemies of my people, but enemies of existence itself. They come from the spaces between realities, where the fundamental forces break down and chaos reigns. Their goal is not conquest, but unmaking." Marcus held up a hand, signaling for quiet as he heard footsteps approaching from the cross corridor. The rhythm was wrong, too perfectly synchronized, like the princess's retinue but without the harmony he'd sensed before. These steps had a mechanical quality that set his teeth on edge. 3 figures rounded the corner wearing the uniforms of station security, but their movements were identical down to the smallest detail. They turned toward Marcus and the princess with perfectly synchronized head tilts, and when they spoke, it was in unison with voices that carried no emotion whatsoever. "Sergeant Chen, Princess Zarathul, You will accompany us to the detention level for processing. Resistance will be met with appropriate force. Marcus didn't hesitate. His first 3 shots took down the lead figure, revealing that beneath the human uniform was the same void-touched darkness they'd encountered in the princess's chambers. The other 2 reacted with inhuman speed, but Marcus had already anticipated their movement patterns. Whatever was controlling them was using optimization protocols that prioritized efficiency over unpredictability. "They're not human anymore," he called to the princess as he engaged the remaining attackers. "Something's wearing their bodies like suits." The princess raised her hand, and for a moment, the air around the possessed security officers began to shimmer. But the effect was weak, barely more than a light breeze where before she might have summoned reality-bending forces. "My abilities are still greatly reduced. You must handle them conventionally." Conventional warfare against unconventional enemies was something Marcus had extensive experience with. He used the corridor's architecture to his advantage, forcing the attackers to approach from a narrow angle while he maintained superior positioning. The experimental ammunition continued to prove effective against whatever the void-touched were using to possess station personnel. As they continued toward secure medical, they encountered more possessed individuals, always in groups of 3. Always moving with that same unsettling synchronization. Marcus began to notice patterns in their behavior that suggested they were being controlled by something with a limited understanding of human tactical thinking. They favored direct approaches over flanking maneuvers and seemed unable to adapt when their initial strategy failed. "Princess, how exactly does this possession work? Are these people still alive in there, or are we fighting corpses?" "The void-touched do not kill when they possess. They overlay. The original consciousness is still present but suppressed, used as a database of memories and behaviors while the entity controls the body. It is possible to restore them, but only if the controlling entity is severed from its source." That complicated things significantly. Marcus had been treating the possessed as enemy combatants, but if there was a chance to save them, his rules of engagement needed to change. He switched to targeting center mass with the goal of incapacitating rather than killing. Though given the nature of the experimental ammunition, he wasn't sure how much difference it would make. Secure medical was located in the station's most protected section, accessible only through a series of blast doors that required multiple authorization codes. Marcus was relieved to find that the security systems in this section were still functioning normally, suggesting that whatever had compromised the rest of the station hadn't penetrated this deep. Dr. Elizabeth Reeves was waiting for them with a full medical team, her face grim as she looked at the princess's condition. "Admiral Harrison briefed me on what's been happening." "How bad is it?" "She used significant power to close what she called a void tear. Says her connection to the fundamental forces has been temporarily severed." Marcus maintained his position by the door while the medical team began their examination of the princess. Dr. Reeves nodded as she ran a scanner that produced readings Marcus couldn't interpret. "We've been studying Celestial Empire physiology since first contact. What you're describing sounds like what they call harmonic severance. It's like temporarily cutting the power lines to a city. The infrastructure is still there, but the energy flow has been interrupted." The princess looked up from the medical bed with eyes that held more vulnerability than Marcus had thought possible. "Doctor, there is something else you must know. The void-touched attack was not random. They came specifically for me during negotiations that could reshape the balance of power in this galaxy. Someone with intimate knowledge of both our species and our capabilities coordinated this assault." Marcus felt a cold certainty settle in his stomach. "Ma'am, are you saying this was an inside job?" "I am saying, Sergeant Chen, that someone very close to these negotiations wants them to fail badly enough to risk unleashing forces that could unravel reality itself." The revelation came through encrypted channels 6 hours after the attack, while Princess Zarathul was still recovering in secure medical. Admiral Harrison's face appeared on the holographic display with the kind of expression that meant someone was about to have a very bad day. "Sergeant Chen, we've identified the security breach. Someone with level 9 diplomatic clearance has been feeding information to an unknown party for the past 3 weeks. They knew the princess's schedule, her security arrangements, and most importantly, they knew about her true nature." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. Level 9 clearance meant the leak was coming from someone at the highest levels of the diplomatic mission. Sir, how many people have that kind of access? 12 individuals, including Ambassador Williams and his senior staff. We're conducting discreet investigations, but until we know who the traitor is, everyone is suspect. The Admiral paused, his expression growing even more grim. There's something else, Sergeant. We've lost contact with 3 other diplomatic stations in this sector. Whatever happened to you appears to be part of a larger coordinated attack. The princess, who had been listening from her medical bed, spoke up with a voice that still carried only faint harmonics. Admiral, if the void touched are moving against multiple positions simultaneously, then this is not merely an assassination attempt. They are preparing for something far more significant. Dr. Reeves looked up from her medical instruments with obvious concern. Your Highness, your recovery is progressing, but it will be at least 48 hours before your abilities are fully restored. If there's another attack, then Sergeant Chen will have to continue protecting me using only human methods. The princess finished. It is perhaps an appropriate test of the partnership our peoples are considering. Marcus checked his remaining ammunition and considered their tactical situation. The secure medical facility could be defended, but only for a limited time. If the void touched could possess station personnel, then eventually they would have enough bodies to overwhelm any defensive position through sheer numbers. Princess, you mentioned that the possession could be reversed if the controlling entity was severed from its source. How exactly would someone go about doing that? She studied him with an expression that seemed to see through to his soul. The void-touched maintain their connection to their realm through quantum entanglement with specific artifacts. Destroy the artifacts and the possessions end. However, locating such artifacts requires abilities I currently lack. What would these artifacts look like? They appear as ordinary objects to most beings, but they exist partially outside normal space-time. To your senses, they might seem to flicker in and out of existence, or cast shadows that move independently of their form. Marcus thought back to everything he'd observed since arriving at the station, looking for anything that had seemed out of place. His military training had taught him to notice details that didn't fit established patterns, and something had been bothering him about Ambassador Williams's office since his first briefing. Ma'am, there was a sculpture in the ambassador's office. Some kind of abstract metal piece that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at it. Could that be one of these artifacts? The princess sat up straighter, her eyes widening with alarm. If an artifact has been placed in a position of such authority, then the corruption runs deeper than we suspected. Ambassador Williams either is the traitor, or has been under void-touched influence for an extended period. Dr. Reeves activated the medical facility's lockdown protocols as alarms began sounding throughout the station. We're detecting massive power fluctuations in the diplomatic section. Something is drawing enormous amounts of energy from the station's main reactor. Through the medical facility's sensors, they could monitor what was happening in other parts of the station. The diplomatic section was transforming, with reality distortions spreading outward from Ambassador Williams' office like ripples in a pond. Walls were becoming translucent, gravity was fluctuating, and the very air was taking on properties that violated several fundamental laws of physics. They're opening a permanent gateway, the princess said, her voice filled with genuine fear for the first time since Marcus had met her. If the void touch succeed in establishing a stable connection between our reality and theirs, the corruption will spread beyond this station. Entire star systems could be consumed. Marcus made the kind of decision that defined his species. When faced with impossible odds and stakes too high to comprehend, he chose to act rather than deliberate. Doctor, how long before the princess can move safely? She shouldn't be moved at all, but if the alternative is reality collapse, I can prepare a portable life support system that will maintain her stability for approximately 2 hours. That'll have to be enough. Marcus began checking his remaining equipment and formulating a plan that was probably suicidal but might actually work. Princess, if I can get you close enough to this artifact, can you destroy it even in your current condition? Perhaps, but the attempt might kill me. And without my abilities at full strength, I cannot protect you from the reality distortion surrounding it. Ma'am, protecting you is my job. Getting yourself killed trying to protect me would be a violation of the chain of responsibility. Marcus managed what he hoped was a reassuring smile. Besides, I've gotten pretty good at surviving things that should kill me. It's become something of a specialty. Dr. Reeves worked quickly to prepare the portable systems while Marcus studied the station schematics, looking for routes that would take them to the diplomatic section, while avoiding the worst of the reality distortions. The maintenance corridors that ran behind the main passages might provide some shielding from whatever was happening to local spacetime. As they prepared to leave Secure Medical, the princess reached out and placed her hand on Marcus's arm. The contact sent a jolt through him, not of electricity but of something far more fundamental. For just a moment he could sense the vast network of forces that she normally commanded, could feel the way reality responded to her presence like a musical instrument being tuned. "Sergeant Chen," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that spoke directly to his soul, "what I am about to tell you must never be shared with your military leadership. The Celestial Empire did not seek alliance with humanity because you have resources we need. We sought alliance because your species possesses something that may be the key to defeating the void touched permanently." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's environmental systems. "What exactly do we have that's so special?" "Chaos," she replied simply. "Your species thrives on unpredictability, on adapting to circumstances that should be impossible to survive. The void-touched understand order and can corrupt it, but they cannot comprehend the kind of beautiful chaos that drives human innovation. You are quite literally too random for them to predict or control effectively." The implications of her words settled over Marcus like a heavy blanket. If she was right, then humanity's greatest weakness might also be their greatest strength. Their tendency toward improvisation, their refusal to accept impossible odds, their habit of finding solutions that violated conventional wisdom, all of these traits that other species found frustrating, might be exactly what was needed to fight an enemy that existed in the spaces between realities. "Princess, are you telling me that the fate of the galaxy might depend on humans being too stubborn to know when we're beaten?" Her laugh carried harmonics like silver bells in a gentle breeze. "Sergeant Chen, I am telling you that your people's greatest gift is your refusal to accept that The maintenance corridors were a nightmare of twisted metal and impossible geometry. As they approached the diplomatic section, reality became increasingly unreliable. Marcus found himself walking on walls that insisted they were floors, breathing air that sometimes flowed like water, and navigating through spaces that were simultaneously too large and too small for human comprehension. Princess Zarathul, supported by the portable life support system Dr. Reeves had hastily assembled, provided running commentary on the reality distortions they encountered. The artifact is drawing power from the quantum foam that underlies normal spacetime. It is essentially eating the foundation of reality to fuel the gateway creation process. Marcus had stopped trying to understand the physics, involved and focused instead on the practical aspects of their mission. The experimental ammunition was running low. He had no backup from station security, and they were walking into what amounted to an alien horror movie made real. In other words, it was Tuesday. "How close do we need to get for you to affect this artifact?" he asked, helping the princess navigate around a section of corridor where gravity was pointing in 3 different directions simultaneously. "Physical contact would be ideal, but I should be able to influence it from within 10 meters if the local reality distortions are not too severe." Her voice was strained from the effort of maintaining her consciousness, while her natural connection to universal forces remained severed. They reached the outer perimeter of the diplomatic section to find that Ambassador Williams's office had become something that hurt to look at directly. The walls were flowing like liquid while maintaining their structural integrity. The air was filled with geometric patterns that existed in too many dimensions, and shadows moved independently of any light source. Through the chaos, Marcus could see the artifact she'd described. The abstract metal sculpture was now clearly revealed as something that belonged to no human aesthetic. It pulsed with dark light, and around it reality bent and twisted like heated plastic. Worse, he could see Ambassador Williams standing beside it, though calling him human at this point was generous. The ambassador's form flickered between his normal appearance and something made of living shadow. When he spoke, his voice carried the same harmonic distortions as the princess, but where hers felt like music, his sounded like the universe screaming. "Sergeant Chen, how good of you to join us. I was hoping to speak with you before the final phase begins. You see, your species has qualities that make you uniquely valuable to the void touched. We've been studying human adaptability and creativity. and we believe we can improve upon your design." Marcus kept his weapon ready while trying to process the tactical situation. The ambassador was positioned behind the artifact, using it as cover, and the reality distortions made it impossible to predict where his shots might go. Even worse, there were at least a dozen station personnel arranged around the room in perfect formation, all showing signs of void-touched possession. "Let me guess," Marcus replied. "You want to turn humanity into your personal army of chaos agents. Thanks, but we prefer to choose our own wars." "Oh, Sergeant, you misunderstand completely. We don't want to control you. We want to become you. Human consciousness with its beautiful unpredictability, combined with void-touched immortality and power, we will be unstoppable, and reality itself will be remade in our image." The princess managed to take a step forward, her voice carrying more strength than Marcus had heard since her recovery began. "You speak of improvement, but what you describe is abomination. Human consciousness is not meant to exist in the spaces between realities. You will destroy the very qualities you seek to possess." Perhaps the ambassador agreed with disturbing cheerfulness. "But the experiment will be fascinating. And if we fail, well, the universe was becoming rather boring anyway." Marcus realized that conventional tactics weren't going to work in this environment. The reality distortions made accurate targeting impossible, and the possessed personnel could attack from angles that didn't technically exist. But the princess had said that humans were valuable precisely because they didn't approach problems conventionally. He did something that violated every rule of tactical engagement he'd ever learned. He holstered his weapon and began walking directly toward the artifact, ignoring the possessed guards who moved to intercept him. "Sergeant, what are you doing?" the princess called after him. "Something that should get me killed but probably won't because nothing about this situation makes sense anyway," Marcus replied, his voice remarkably calm for someone walking into certain death. "Princess, when I say the word chaos, I want you to do whatever it takes to destroy that artifact, regardless of the consequences." The possessed guards reached him first, their movements perfectly coordinated as they attempted to surround him. But Marcus had noticed something about their coordination. It was too perfect, optimized for efficiency rather than adaptability. They were predicting his movements based on logical tactical thinking. So Marcus stopped thinking tactically and started acting like a human. He began moving in patterns that made no strategic sense, dodging left when he should have gone right, dropping to the ground when he should have maintained mobility, even stopping mid-stride to tie his bootlace when weapons fire was passing inches over his head. The possessed guards couldn't adapt to his behavior because there was no logical pattern to adapt to. "Your species truly is fascinating," the ambassador observed as his guards became increasingly confused by Marcus's seemingly random movements. "But chaos alone will not save you." "You're right," Marcus agreed, pulling the pins from his last two grenades while continuing his erratic movement pattern. But chaos plus explosives usually does the trick. He threw both grenades not at the ambassador or the artifact, but at the ceiling supports that were already weakened by reality distortion. The explosions brought down a section of the station's superstructure, creating new cover and blocking several of the guards' firing angles. More importantly, the collapse disrupted whatever was maintaining the stable geometry around the artifact. The reality distortions became chaotic rather than controlled, and Marcus could see the ambassador struggling to maintain his connection to the alien device. "Now would be a good time, Princess," Marcus called as he continued his impossible dance through impossibly angled weapon fire. "Chaos," she responded, and spoke a word that contained so many harmonics it might have been the universe's true name. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Every system in the diplomatic section overloaded simultaneously. The artifact's dark pulse became erratic, and the reality distortions collapsed in on themselves like a house of cards in a hurricane. The ambassador screamed, a sound that made the void-touched attack seem gentle by comparison, and began dissolving back into the shadows from which he'd emerged. But the artifact was fighting back, drawing power from sources that existed outside normal space-time. The dark light pulsing from its core began to stabilize, and Marcus realized that the princess's attack hadn't been enough to destroy it completely. That's when he did something that would have gotten him court-martialed. Dishonorably discharged and probably committed to a psychiatric facility under normal circumstances. He tackled an artifact from beyond reality while armed with nothing but human stubbornness, and the last magazine of experimental ammunition, physical. Contact with the artifact was like grasping a live, electrical wire while being struck by lightning during an earthquake. Every nerve in Marcus's body screamed in protest as alien energies flowed through him, but he held on and began systematically emptying his magazine into the device at point-blank range. The experimental ammunition, designed to exist in quantum superposition until it made contact with its target, had an interesting effect when fired directly into an object that was simultaneously real and unreal. The bullets forced the artifact to choose a single quantum state, and the choice was existence or non-existence. The artifact chose poorly. It collapsed into normal space-time with a sound like the universe sighing in relief, then shattered into fragments that dissolved before they hit the ground. The reality distortions vanished. Gravity reasserted itself in a single direction, and the possessed station personnel collapsed as the controlling entities were severed from their source. Marcus found himself lying on what was once again a normal floor, his entire body feeling like he'd been struck by lightning. The princess knelt beside him, her natural glow beginning to return as her connection to the fundamental forces restored itself. "Sergeant Chen," she said, her voice once again carrying the complex harmonics he'd grown accustomed to, "I believe you may have just saved not only our lives, but the structural integrity of local reality itself." Marcus managed to sit up, noting that Ambassador Williams was breathing normally and showing no signs of void possession. "Ma'am, does this mean the negotiations can continue?" Her laugh was like music made of starlight and possibility. "Sergeant, after what you have accomplished here, I believe the 3 months later, Marcus stood on the observation deck of the newly commissioned joint human-celestial diplomatic vessel, watching as the first combined fleet exercises took place in the void between star systems. The ships moved with a harmony that reminded him of the princess's retinue, but with an underlying chaos that was distinctly human. The integration had been surprisingly smooth, once both species understood what they brought to the partnership. The Celestial Empire provided technology and understanding of the fundamental forces that governed reality. Humanity provided adaptability, creativity, and what the aliens had come to call productive chaos theory. Princess Zarathul approached him from behind, her footsteps now familiar enough that he didn't need to turn around to know it was her. Over the months of continued cooperation, she had become something Marcus hadn't expected when he first accepted the assignment. A friend. "The joint tactical exercises are proceeding well," she observed, settling beside him at the observation window. "Your Admiral Harrison's strategies are proving highly effective against simulated void-touched incursions." Marcus nodded, watching as human destroyers wove through formations of Celestial Empire ships that seemed to be made of crystallized light. "Turns out that when you combine your people's ability to maintain reality with our talent for creative destruction, you get something neither side could achieve alone." The princess smiled, an expression that no longer carried the alien mystery it once had. "There is something I must tell you, Sergeant. Something that my people's diplomatic protocols prevented me from sharing during the initial negotiations." Marcus felt a familiar chill of apprehension. After 3 months of working together, he'd learned that when the princess prefaced something with formal protocols, the news was usually significant. "What kind of something, ma'am?" The void-touched incursion at the station was not an isolated incident. "Our long-range sensors have detected similar reality disturbances throughout this galactic sector. What you prevented that day was not simply an assassination attempt, but a preliminary test of defenses for a much larger invasion." The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. If the station attack had been just a test, then the real assault would be on a scale that dwarfed anything he'd experienced. "How much larger are we talking about, Princess?" "The preliminary estimates suggest that the void-touched are preparing to assault this reality on multiple fronts simultaneously. Thousands of artifacts like the one you destroyed, coordinated incursions across hundreds of star systems, all designed to weaken the boundaries between dimensions until they can establish permanent gateways." Marcus leaned against the observation window, processing the tactical implications. A conflict of that scale would require resources and coordination beyond anything either species had attempted before. It would mean total war against an enemy that existed partially outside the laws of physics. "Ma'am, please tell me that your people have a plan for dealing with this." We do, she confirmed. But it requires something that goes against thousands of years of Celestial Empire policy. We need to share our most closely guarded secrets with humanity, including knowledge that could fundamentally alter your species' development. The princess gestured toward the fleet exercises, where human and alien ships were beginning to move in synchronized patterns that seemed to bend space-time around them. What you see there is only the beginning. With full technological integration, humanity could become something unprecedented in galactic history. A species capable of existing simultaneously in ordered reality and productive chaos. Marcus considered the magnitude of what she was suggesting. The technological and evolutionary leap she was describing would transform humanity beyond recognition. It was the kind of change that defined the difference between planetary and galactic civilizations. Princess, what exactly are you asking me to recommend to my superiors? I am asking you to trust that your species' greatest strength, its ability to adapt and survive impossible circumstances, will carry it through the transformation required to fight this war. Her voice carried harmonics that spoke of vast possibilities and terrible risks in equal measure. And if we refuse? If humanity decides that the risk is too great, then the void touched will eventually consume this reality entirely, one star system at a time, until nothing remains but the spaces between what used to be. The princess turned to face him directly, her eyes holding the depth of stellar phenomena. Sergeant Chen, what happened at the station proved that humans alone cannot defeat the void touched. But it also proved that they cannot be defeated without human involvement. Marcus looked out at the fleet exercises, where ships from two utterly different civilizations were learning to move as one coordinated force. The sight should have been impossible, given the fundamental differences between human and celestial technology. But somehow it was working. Ma'am, there's something I need to know before I can make any recommendations. During the station incident, you said that humans were valuable because of our chaos and adaptability, but there's more to it than that, isn't there? The princess was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried harmonics he'd never heard before, frequencies that spoke of concepts humanity didn't have words for. Sergeant, your species possesses something that exists nowhere else in our experience of the galaxy. You have the ability to change the fundamental nature of reality through sheer force of will and refusal to accept limitations. That sounds like something that should be impossible. It is impossible, she agreed, and yet you do it constantly. Every time humans face extinction and survive through ingenuity and stubbornness, every time your species achieves something that violates the known laws of probability, you demonstrate that reality is more flexible than most beings believe. Marcus felt a weight settling on his shoulders that had nothing to do with physical mass. If what the princess was saying was true, then humanity's role in the coming conflict wouldn't be as junior partners in an alien alliance. They would be the deciding factor in a war for the nature of existence itself. Princess, I need you to be completely clear about something. Are you saying that the fate of the galaxy depends on humans being too stubborn to accept defeat? Her smile carried harmonics like the sound of stars being born. Sergeant Chen, I am saying that the fate of reality itself depends on humanity's refusal to acknowledge that anything is truly impossible. And based on everything I have observed about your species, I believe that is precisely the kind of impossible task at which humans excel. Marcus activated his communication device and began composing a message to Admiral Harrison. The content would probably result in him being transferred to psychiatric evaluation. But the princess was right about one thing. Humans had a talent for succeeding at impossible tasks. Admiral, he spoke into the comm, this is Guardian Actual with a priority recommendation regarding the Celestial Empire Alliance. Request immediate conference with Joint Command. The scope of our mutual defense requirements has expanded significantly. As he finished the message, Marcus looked out at the fleet exercises where human chaos and alien order were creating something entirely new, something that had never existed before in galactic history. Maybe that was exactly what they would need to fight an enemy that existed in the spaces between realities. After all, if reality was going to war with the void, it made sense to have soldiers who specialized in making the impossible happen, through sheer bloody-minded determination to succeed. And humans, Marcus reflected, had always been exceptionally good at refusing to admit when they were beaten. The princess placed her hand on his shoulder, and for a moment Marcus could sense the vast network of forces she commanded. could feel the way reality itself responded to her presence, but more than that, he could sense her absolute confidence that humanity would find a way to succeed, because that was what humans did when the stakes were too high to accept failure. "Welcome to the war for existence itself. Sergeant Chen," she said.